Disney World looks like the happiest place on earth right up until you try to bring in the wrong thing, wear the wrong outfit, or push the wrong kind of wagon, and suddenly you're having a very different conversation with a security guard at the front gate. Over the decades, Disney has quietly banned an enormous list of objects, behaviors, and outfits that most people would never expect to need a rule against. These are 15 things in Disney World that had to be banned. Number 15. Selfie sticks. Selfie sticks were banned across all Disney parks worldwide starting in mid-2015, and the timing wasn't random. Disney had been watching the broader theme park industry deal with an uptick in incidents involving the things, people extending them dangerously close to ride mechanisms, accidentally hitting other guests in the face while trying to capture the perfect group photo, and in a few documented cases at other parks, getting them caught in moving ride equipment. The ban applies to every theme park and water park on Disney property, and it's enforced at the bag check stage before guests even reach the turnstiles. Security staff are trained to spot them quickly, since they're a fairly distinctive shape compared to most of what guests bring in their bags. Disney's stated reasoning has always centered on safety rather than aesthetics, though plenty of longtime visitors have pointed out that the company seems perfectly happy to sell you the alternative. Professional PhotoPass photographers stationed throughout the parks who will, for a fee, take the photo you would have otherwise taken yourself for free. Whether that's a coincidence or a business decision dressed up as a safety policy is the kind of thing reasonable people can disagree about. The ban was part of a broader industry-wide trend at the time. Other major attractions and venues, including several music festivals and sporting events, implemented similar restrictions around the same period, suggesting the selfie stick had become enough of a recognized nuisance across public spaces generally that Disney wasn't acting alone or in isolation. Still, given the sheer volume of daily visitors passing through Disney's gates, the company's version of the ban tends to get cited more often than most, if only because so many more people run into it firsthand. Number 14. Folding chairs. If you've ever tried to claim a parade viewing spot on Main Street with a folding camp chair, Disney security has bad news for you. Folding chairs of any kind, camping chairs, stadium seats, collapsible stools, are banned from every theme park and from Disney Springs. The rule exists primarily as crowd management. Disney's pathways get packed during parades and nighttime spectaculars, and a few hundred folding chairs scattered across Main Street would turn already tight walkways into an obstacle course, particularly during evacuation scenarios where clear pathways matter most. Disney's official suggestion is to use the benches, walls, and curbs scattered throughout the parks, or to simply arrive early and claim ground-level seating. For anyone with mobility concerns, the parks also offer accessible viewing areas, which is at least a more functional answer than just stand for 3 hours. It's worth noting this rule predates the more recent stroller and wagon restrictions by quite a while, suggesting Disney has been thinking about pedestrian density and emergency access for longer than most casual visitors probably realize. Families who've visited multiple times over the years often mention the chair rule as one of the more frustrating ones to plan around, since claiming a comfortable parade spot without a chair effectively means committing to standing or sitting directly on pavement, sometimes for the better part of an hour before the actual parade even begins. Number 13. Stroller wagons. Since May 1st, 2019, push or pull wagons, including the popular stroller-style wagons many parents had been bringing for years, have been completely banned inside Disney's theme parks. This includes every size and every material, with the only exception being ADA-approved wagons used at the discretion of Disney's own security team for guests with documented mobility needs. The decision frustrated a lot of parents who had built entire touring strategies around these wagons, since they could carry multiple kids, snacks, and gear in a way regular strollers couldn't match. Stroller wagons had become genuinely popular in the years leading up to the ban, marketed heavily online and through parenting blogs as the ideal Disney touring vehicle, which only made the policy change feel more abrupt to families who'd specifically purchased one for an upcoming trip. Disney's reasoning came down to crowd flow. The wagons are significantly longer and harder to maneuver through dense pedestrian traffic than a standard stroller, and as park attendance climbed back toward record highs in the years before the ban, the company decided the trade-off wasn't worth it anymore. There was also an indoor parking and storage component to the decision. Wagons take up considerably more space in the designated stroller parking areas near each attraction, and with thousands of strollers already competing for limited space, the wagons were creating logistical headaches that compounded as the day went on. Standard strollers remain allowed, provided they fall within Disney's specific size limits. Number 12. Oversized strollers. Speaking of stroller size limits, those didn't exist forever either. Back in 2019, Disney implemented a maximum stroller size of 31 inches in width and 52 inches in length. Strollers exceeding either measurement are turned away at the gate, full stop, regardless of how many kids or how much luggage the family is trying to manage, and regardless of how far the family traveled specifically expecting to use that stroller throughout their trip. This rule, like the wagon ban, traces back to the same underlying problem. Disney's walkways were never designed for the kind of oversized double and triple wide strollers that became increasingly common as stroller manufacturers competed to fit more cargo and more comfort into a single unit. A family showing up with an enormous stroller they bought specifically for the trip, only to be told at the entrance that it's too big to bring inside, is a recurring and genuinely unpleasant surprise for a lot of first-time visitors, particularly those who didn't think to check Disney's specific size guidelines before packing for the trip. Disney does offer stroller rentals on site that comply with the size limits, which solves the problem but doesn't necessarily soften the sting of having spent money on the wrong one beforehand, especially for families who'd researched and purchased a premium stroller specifically with theme park touring in mind. Number 11. Large and hard-sided coolers. Coolers are technically allowed at Disney World, but only within strict limits. Suitcases, coolers, or backpacks larger than 24 inches long, 15 inches wide, and 18 inches high are not permitted in any theme park or water park, and hard-sided coolers in particular tend to draw extra scrutiny at security regardless of size, since their rigid structure makes them harder to quickly inspect. Loose or dry ice is also banned outright. Guests are encouraged to use reusable ice packs instead, and Disney points out that cups of ice are available free of charge at food and beverage locations throughout the parks, which is a fairly reasonable workaround once you know about it. For guests who need to bring medication that requires refrigeration, Disney allows that cooler to be stored in a locker or checked with guest relations rather than carried around all day, which is a small but genuinely useful accommodation buried in an otherwise restrictive policy. Number 10. Glass containers. Glass containers of essentially any kind, including glass water bottles and glass soda bottles, are banned from Disney World's theme parks and water parks. The one notable exception is small glass baby food jars, which are allowed because, reasonably, there isn't a great non-glass alternative for that particular product category. The logic here is straightforward. Broken glass in a crowded amusement park, especially anywhere near a pool deck or a packed walkway full of people in sandals, is a genuine hazard that nobody wants to deal with. A single dropped glass bottle near a ride queue could mean shutting down a section of walkway for cleanup, delaying operations, and creating exactly the kind of disruption Disney works hard to avoid throughout a normal operating day. Interestingly, glass containers are allowed inside Disney's resort hotels, just not inside the theme parks and water parks themselves, so the rule is specifically tied to the higher density, higher risk environment of the parks rather than Disney property as a whole. Guests are also able to purchase beverages in glass bottles at certain in-park dining locations and lounges, where the consumption happens in a controlled seated environment rather than while walking through crowded pathways, which suggests the actual concern is less about glass existing on Disney property at all, and more about glass moving through dense pedestrian traffic specifically. Number 9. Drones. Disney banned personal drones across all of its theme parks following a series of incidents at other public events and venues where unauthorized drone flights created serious safety and security concerns. The policy is enforced aggressively, and Disney has pursued legal action against individuals who have flown drones over its parks without authorization, treating it as a security matter rather than a minor rules violation, occasionally working directly with federal aviation authorities to do so. Part of the concern is straightforward physical safety. A drone losing power or control above a crowd of thousands of people is a genuinely dangerous scenario, particularly given how many of Disney's outdoor attractions and nighttime shows draw enormous concentrated crowds into relatively confined viewing areas. But there's also a less obvious layer to it. Disney runs its own elaborate drone shows as part of its nighttime entertainment, choreographed displays involving hundreds of synchronized drones that the company has invested heavily in producing. An unauthorized drone wandering into that airspace isn't just a safety risk, it's also a liability and intellectual property headache that Disney has zero interest in untangling in real time during a live show. Disney has worked with the Federal Aviation Administration over the years to establish no-fly zones above its properties, giving the company legal backing beyond its own internal park rules. Visitors who fly drones near Disney property, even from outside the park boundaries, have in some documented cases faced federal penalties rather than just a stern conversation with park security, which underscores just how seriously the company and federal regulators have come to treat the issue. Number 8. Toy weapons and realistic prop blasters. This is a rule that's existed in some form for years, but has been enforced with noticeably more intensity recently, particularly since the opening of Star Wars. Galaxy's Edge made detailed prop weapon costumes a much more common sight throughout Disney's Hollywood studios. Toy guns, prop blasters, and weapon-styled costume accessories that look too realistic are increasingly being stopped at security checkpoints, even when the person carrying them is clearly dressed as a fictional character. Disney's concern isn't really about the toys themselves. It's about the split-second confusion a realistic-looking weapon prop could cause in a crowd, especially in an era where public anxiety around weapons in crowded spaces has only intensified. Guests dressing up as Star Wars characters with detailed blaster replicas have increasingly been asked to leave the prop in their car or hotel room rather than carry it through the park, even when the intent is purely costume-related. It's an inconvenience for cosplay enthusiasts, but Disney has made clear it would rather frustrate a fan than risk a misunderstanding that could create panic. Number 7. Self-defense items. Pepper spray, mace, tasers, and any other self-defense or restraining device are strictly prohibited at Disney World, and they will be confiscated at the entrance if security finds them during a bag check. This includes items that many people carry as a matter of routine personal safety in their everyday lives outside the parks, and the confiscation policy applies regardless of whether the guest has a permit or legal right to carry the item elsewhere. Disney's reasoning is fairly common sense once you think about it. In a dense crowd of strangers, the chance of someone accidentally deploying pepper spray on themselves or an innocent bystander is a real and recurring risk, and the park's own security infrastructure is meant to be the primary line of defense for guests, rather than something individuals are expected to handle themselves. Disney's parks employ extensive uniformed and plainclothes security personnel, metal detectors, and bag screening specifically so that guests don't feel they need to bring their own deterrents through the gate. It's a rule a lot of people don't think about until they're standing at the metal detector being asked to hand over the small canister they've been carrying in their bag for years without incident. Most guests, once they understand the reasoning, simply leave the item in their car for the day rather than arguing the point with security. Number 6. Horns, whistles, and noisemakers. Horns, whistles, large megaphones, and artificial noisemakers of any kind are banned throughout Disney's parks. This one tends to surprise people the most, since it feels like the kind of thing that should be fine in a place explicitly designed around fun and celebration, and plenty of guests have shown up with a noisemaker for a birthday celebration or a graduation trip only to be told to leave it behind. Disney's explanation comes down to the carefully engineered soundscape that the company invests enormous resources into maintaining throughout its parks. The ambient music, the themed sound effects, the carefully sequenced audio cues tied to specific lands and attractions. Walking from one themed area to another in the Magic Kingdom involves a deliberately composed transition in background music, designed so that one land's audio fades out just as the next one's fades in, with no jarring overlap. A guest blasting a vuvuzela or an air horn in the middle of Fantasyland isn't just being mildly obnoxious, it's actively disrupting crafting an audio experience that Disney's Imagineers spent considerable time and money designing down to the smallest detail. It's a rule that exists less for safety and more for what Disney would describe as show, the term the company uses internally for maintaining the immersive illusion of its parks. Enforcement tends to be more about a polite request from a cast member than a formal security intervention, at least for first offenses. Number 5. Marijuana and other illegal substances. Smoking marijuana or using other illegal substances is explicitly prohibited at Disney World at all times, regardless of state or local laws that may apply outside the property. Florida has not legalized recreational marijuana use, which makes this particular rule somewhat less complicated than it might be at a theme park located in a state where cannabis laws are more permissive. But Disney's policy applies the same standard regardless of where any individual guest happens to be visiting from. The smoking restriction extends well beyond marijuana too. Disney's parks are entirely smoke-free, including for tobacco and e-cigarettes, with designated outdoor smoking areas being the only exception. Guests who smoke in their resort hotel rooms or on balconies face a room recovery fee that typically runs between $250 and $500, a policy Disney enforces through smoke detection equipment in guest rooms that can flag violations even after the fact. Number 4. Costumes for guests 14 and older. Disney bans costumes and costume masks for any guest aged 14 or older, with a few specific exceptions carved out for certain ticketed events like Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, where costume rules are relaxed for the evening. Outside of those special occasions, an adult walking through the Magic Kingdom in a full Mickey Mouse costume is going to have a problem at the front gate, even if their intentions are entirely innocent and the costume is clearly just for fun. The reasoning is fairly direct. Disney needs to maintain a clear visual distinction between its actual costumed cast members performing as characters and any random guest who decided to dress as the same character for fun. A guest in convincing costume could create confusion among other visitors, particularly young children, who might genuinely believe they're interacting with the real, official version of that character, rather than another park visitor wearing a similar outfit purchased online. There have also historically been concerns about costumed guests trying to interact with children or pose for unofficial character photos in ways Disney has no ability to vet or supervise, which raises obvious safety questions the company would rather avoid entirely. The age cutoff of 14 specifically lines up with Disney's general policy threshold for a number of other rules across the resort, treating that age as roughly the dividing line between childhood costume play, which the company actively encourages and even sells merchandise to support, and adult costume wearing, which raises a different set of concerns entirely. Younger children are still permitted to dress as their favorite Disney characters throughout the parks without restriction, a policy that remains a popular and expected part of the overall family experience, particularly for young girls dressed as princesses on their first visit. Number 3. Excessively revealing clothing. Disney's dress code prohibits clothing that exposes what the company describes as inappropriate portions of the body, specifically calling out items like string bikini tops, G-strings, and bikini bottoms worn without additional coverage. The policy applies across the theme parks, water parks, and Disney Springs, with slightly different standards applying specifically at Disney's water parks, Blizzard Beach, and Typhoon Lagoon, where swimwear is obviously expected but certain styles still don't pass muster. Disney also reserves the right to deny entry or remove any guest wearing clothing the company considers inappropriate or distracting to the broader family-oriented experience it's trying to maintain. This has occasionally led to disputes over where exactly that line sits, since inappropriate is a fairly subjective standard that gives Disney's on-site staff significant discretion in the moment. Shirts and shoes are required at all times throughout the parks, a baseline rule that surprises almost nobody, but is worth mentioning since Disney enforces it just as strictly as the more eyebrow-raising restrictions. Number 2. Visible offensive tattoos. Visible tattoos containing what Disney describes as objectionable language or imagery are not permitted, and guests displaying them may be asked to cover the tattoo before entering the park, or, in more extreme cases, denied entry entirely. This rule sits at the intersection of Disney's broader dress code policies and its general standard of maintaining a family-appropriate environment across all of its properties, and it applies to cast members and visiting guests alike, though the standards and consequences differ somewhat between the the two groups. In practice, enforcement tends to focus on the most clearly inappropriate cases. Explicit imagery, profanity, or content that would obviously clash with the family-friendly atmosphere Disney has spent decades cultivating, rather than aggressively policing every guest with visible body art. Disney security typically isn't scrutinizing every tattoo sleeve walking through the gate. The rule exists more as a tool for the rare situations where something genuinely crosses a line that would otherwise have no clear policy basis for addressing. Still, it's a rule that occasionally catches visitors off guard, particularly those who don't think of a specific tattoo as offensive in their own daily life, but find themselves asked to put on a long-sleeve shirt before they can enter the Magic Kingdom, a request that can feel jarring in the moment even when the underlying logic is understandable. Number 1. Trailer-like objects and push-towed items. Any trailer-like object pushed, pulled, or towed by an electric conveyance vehicle, wheelchair, stroller, or person is banned from Disney's theme parks. This is one of the more obscure rules on this list, and it exists primarily to close a loophole that creative guests had started exploiting around the stroller wagon ban and general size restrictions, attaching small trailers or extra cargo carriers to existing approved mobility devices in order to bring more gear into the parks than the standard rules technically allowed. Disney's enforcement here tends to be situational, applied at the discretion of security staff who encounter something that looks like it's stretching the spirit of existing size and crowd flow rules, even if it technically doesn't fall under an existing named category. It's the kind of catch-all policy that exists specifically because guests, collectively, are remarkably resourceful about finding workarounds to whatever the previous rule happened to be, and Disney has had to keep expanding its list of prohibited items just to keep pace with everyone's creativity. What all of this actually tells you. None of these bans happened in a vacuum. Almost every single one traces back to a specific incident, a specific complaint pattern, or a specific moment where Disney's operational team looked at what guests were actually doing inside the parks and decided the existing rules weren't covering it. Selfie sticks got banned after enough close calls at other venues made the broader industry nervous. Stroller wagons got banned once crowd density made narrow, oversized vehicles a genuine bottleneck. Drones got banned the moment unauthorized flights over public events became a real security concern nationwide, not just at Disney specifically. What's notable is how often the justification Disney offers publicly, safety, crowd flow, maintaining the family atmosphere, lines up cleanly with decisions that also happen to be financially convenient for the company. Banning selfie sticks pushes guests toward paid PhotoPass photographers. Banning oversized strollers nudges families toward Disney's own stroller rental counters. None of that necessarily means the safety rationale is false, but it's also not exactly a coincidence that the rules Disney enacts tend to line up neatly with services Disney happens to sell. A longtime annual pass holder, commenting on an online forum about the wagon ban back in 2019, summed up the general guest sentiment fairly bluntly. The rules kept changing every year, and it felt like keeping up with what you could and couldn't bring had become its own part of trip planning. That sentiment hasn't really gone away. If anything, the list has only grown longer since then, particularly as security concerns around weapons and drones have become more pressing in the years since, and as Disney continues fine-tuning crowd management strategies in response to record-breaking attendance years. It's also worth pointing out that these rules don't apply evenly across every situation. Disney's own staff retain a fair amount of discretion in how strictly any individual rule gets enforced on a given day, which means two families bringing the exact same borderline item through security on different days, or even at different entrance lanes on the same day, might have entirely different experiences. That inconsistency is its own minor source of guest frustration, separate from the rules themselves, since it makes it harder for people to plan around what's actually going to get flagged versus what's technically against the rules, but rarely enforced in practice. What hasn't changed is the basic trade-off guests are making every time they walk through the gates. Disney World remains an enormously popular destination precisely because of the controlled, curated experience it offers. And that control requires rules, even when some of those rules feel arbitrary, inconvenient, or a little too convenient for Disney's bottom line. Whether you think that's a fair trade probably depends on how attached you were to your folding chair. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.